So that's a brief introduction about HDFS. What is MapReduce? So MapReduce is the way in which a given big job is split into smaller jobs, and along with the data, it is sent across the nodes. Again, I'll give a couple of seconds for the slide to come up, but while it is coming up, the MapReduce has three major components. There are a few sub-components at this point, probably it's not required. One is the mapping part, which you can say is the splitting and distributing of the data in the program. And then there is a shuffling part, which is somewhat like a sorting. And then there is the reduce part, which is somewhat like aggregating. That is at a very high level what MapReduce is all about. So basically, you have a big job which is split into smaller tasks and then spread across the nodes, which facilitates parallel processing, and then the whole information is aggregated. So that way, the processing is much, much faster and scalable. This becomes clearer with this example. Again, I'll give a couple of seconds for the slide to come up. This is a very common MapReduce example, which is called word count. So what this does is you have a file which obviously has a bunch of words, and you want to know how many times a given word occurs in this file. Again, this is just a simple illustration of how MapReduce works. So the way it works is, let's assume this is a big file, and each of those rows is like one piece of that big file. So it is split, as I mentioned, HDFS splits the file into smaller chunks. So the same thing happens here. So let's assume it is split into three files, smaller files, and each of them has 3 words. And then the mapping happens whereby each word is counted and it is given a number. And then the shuffling happens whereby you will see that, for example, where occurs twice, once in the first file and then in the third file. So the shuffling process is basically bringing both the pairs together. So that is like somewhat like sorting. And then the reducing part, the reduce part basically is aggregating this. So it says, okay, twice and so on. And then the final result is provided. So this is again a very simplistic way of explaining how MapReduce works. It is a little more complicated than that, but this is just to understand. This is another view of how this whole thing works. So we submit a job, which could be a big program, and then that is broken down into tasks. And the cluster basically consists of name node and data nodes. So when you say a Hadoop cluster, it consists of somewhat like master and slaves. So the name node is like the master and the data nodes are like the slaves. So the job is broken into that is another way of representation. Thanks to Hortonworks. This slide is from Hortonworks presentation. This is the Hadoop ecosystem. Basically, what are various components within Hadoop? As I mentioned, there were 2 main components, but there were other tools also I was talking about. So this slide gives a quick overview of what are the various components within Hadoop. It is, you might feel it is fairly complicated, which is true. There are several components, so no one person can probably become an expert at all of these components. but each of us can decide based on our skills. So MapReduce, for example, is a component good for programmers. This is a person with developer profile would like to increase their proficiency in MapReduce. Whereas somebody with database knowledge and analytics would probably more tend towards Hive and HBase and so on. So these tools provide, like for example, Scoop is like an ETL tool. You use it to import data. Hive is actually an interface for MapReduce. Basically, Hive is a project which is developed to hide the complexity of MapReduce so that you can write queries in like SQL. So they call it HiveQL or HQL. But behind the scenes, it actually executes MapReduce. So that is Hive. And Pig is used to write a series of statements, like SQL statements. It's somewhat like TLSQL. And so on. So there are other components, probably we don't have time to go into all the details, but this is a quick overview of the various components of Hadoop. This benefits of Hadoop, I think I already mentioned earlier, just to reiterate. This runs on commodity hardware, handles automatically the data replication and redundancy in case of node failure. And last but not least, Apache Hadoop is free. It's an open source. There are of course commercial versions I will touch upon very quickly. These are the commercial versions of Hadoop distribution. Just like any other open source, there are commercial versions of Hadoop as well. And the most common ones are Cloudera and Hortonworks. But of late, pretty much every big vendor has their own distribution, including IBM's InfoSphere Big Insights. The major difference is that they come with a lot more bells and whistles. So it's very easy to use these commercial versions compared to Apache Hadoop. Now, I will probably skip some of these slides. This shows, especially for those technical folks who want to know how to get started. These few slides are put together, but in the interest of time, I will probably move forward so that we can cover the social media part as well. So the main starting point to get started is hadoop.apache.org, and once you go there, I think all the information is available on how to get started, how to install, and so on and so forth. So I will kind of skip these few slides so that we have some more time at the end for question and answers.